Thanks very much, everybody. So I suppose we're going to talk about breathlessness, and one solution to reduce breathlessness is actually to breathe less. So it's totally contrary to what Marcus demonstrated earlier on, but that's fine. Normally when people think about breathing, they believe that the more air you breathe into your body, that the more oxygen is being delivered to the cells, and that is simply not correct. So we do want to turn that on its head. This is going to be more so about the application of breathing for physical movement. You all will move. You either walk, you run, you do yoga, whatever movement you do. Now, here are two runners, and it's likely that they have the same training, they're on the same road and the same weather. But when you look closely, they tell a different story. One has her mouth open, she's struggling to breathe, she's breathing hard, she can't get enough air into her body. And the other is doing her physical exercise with calm, controlled, and more regular breathing patterns. Now, we also have to bear in mind that breathlessness is a breathing problem. So why isn't that being targeted from a breathing problem? If we want to change something that's wrong with the breathing system, we need to be looking at breathing. And my argument here is that physical training will not train your breathing. But if you train your breathing, it will enhance your physical training. So while many people run, and they run with their mouths open, I want to switch that and to start off with the basics. And sometimes you might have to go a little bit less to get the body to make adaptations. And once those adaptations happen, then that will improve your physical performance. So when I look at the drivers that cause breathlessness and drive the sensation of breathlessness, there are 6. And if you take a look at this chart, in red is the bar that breathing training has the impact, and in white is the bar that physical training has that impact. And this is a little bit sciencey, but I always think it's important, especially in breathing, that you're dealing with just normal physiology, that it's not just taken out of thin air. So when we look at CO2 sensitivity, this is the primary driver to breathe. Oxygen does not drive your breathing. Every breath that you are taking right now is not driven by oxygen. Carbon dioxide is the primary driver to breathe, and it's a gas that we produce internally, and we only breathe to get rid of about 15% of the gas that we produce. We actually hold on to 85% of that gas. But if we're overly sensitive to carbon dioxide, we are going to be breathing hard and fast. So going back to the runner who was struggling to breathe, one question to ask there is, what is our chemosensitivity to carbon dioxide? The second aspect is our ventilatory pattern. How are they breathing in their normal everyday? Are they breathing hard, upper chest? Are they breathing fast? Are they breathing irregular? Because if you have poor breathing in your normal everyday, it's not going to suddenly fix itself when you're doing physical exercise. Next is the acid-base balance. If you overbreathe during physical exercise, you get rid of too much carbon dioxide. And what happens then? Your blood vessels constrict. So people with cold hands and cold feet, that's not necessarily down to a warm heart. That's down to breathing too much air often. And if you practice breathing a little bit less air, to expose yourself to an increase of CO2, and you feel air hunger, you'll often notice that your hands, the temperature of your hands, will improve. Now, it's not just the temperature of your hands, it's 50,000 miles of blood vessels throughout the body. And I often find it so strange that people are teaching breathing and they don't look at the basic physiology of what happens when you do a particular breathing exercise. O2 delivery. Here, physical training, of course, it's going to help with O2 delivery. It strengthens your heart, it powers the muscles, and it drives your movement. But yet, if we look at the red bar there, and if we look at CO2 sensitivity, breath training is the one that drives that the most. Ventilatory pattern, that again is breath training. Acid-base balance is breath training. O2 delivery, yes, physical training has the lead, but breath training also plays a role here because you can influence your breathing, not just what's coming into your nose or mouth, but you can influence it downstream. We can literally influence oxygen delivery from the blood to the tissues and organs. And I can genuinely say, if you look into the science of this, you can improve blood flow to your brain by between 5 and 10% just by breathing a little bit less air. And I will talk about that also in the context of physical exercise. Respiratory muscle fatigue. So, of course, if you're working a muscle very hard, that muscle can be prone to fatigue. And if the diaphragm fatigues, which is your main breathing muscle, if that gets tired, the body is going to sacrifice other functions to maintain respiration. And what happens is that blood is stolen from the legs to feed the diaphragm. So when you see a runner down the track and the next thing is the legs start going from under that person, is that due to a buildup of hydrogen ions or fatigue, or is it due to the diaphragm breathing muscle getting tired? We do need to train the diaphragm. If you're working it hard, we need to strengthen it. We need to improve the function. Lastly, probably most important, is the psychological perception of breathlessness, that raw feeling of air hunger, because that can generate a fear response. And air hunger is a primal fear. So how do you train it? Because if you're feeling an intense sensation of breathlessness during physical exercise, that's going to determine the limits of your exertion. So it's not the heart rate. If your breath says this is hard, your brain is going to listen. So we need to be thinking of the rate of perceived exertion here, and we need to be training all of these variables. So when we talk about breathing, never just think that respiration is what you're taking into your nose or mouth. Okay, you have your respiratory rate, you have your tidal volume, you're taking in a volume of air into your lungs per minute. But you can influence alveolar ventilation. You can influence by changing your breathing how much of that air gets down to the small air sacs in the lungs. You can influence by changing your breathing how oxygen transfers from the lungs into the blood. You can influence by changing your breathing how oxygen is transferred from the blood to the tissues and organs. And again, if we think of the human brain, it consumes 20% of our oxygen, 15 to 25% of our cardiac output. It's 2% of our body weight. So the brain as an organ consumes 10 times more oxygen than any other organ in the human body. And we can influence the excitability of the brain. And if you think that people will often do physical exercise to help with their mental health, well, why not stack more upon that? It's not just about running. It's not just about movement. And of course, that's all really brilliant. It does so much for the human body. But let's go a little bit more into it. So you might say that athletes have good breathing. Well, that's not always the case, because physical training does not improve your breathing pattern. This was a paper that was published in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research in 2022. They looked at 1,933 athletes from Japan. The conclusion on that paper was that the prevalence of athletes with dysfunctional breathing patterns is 90%. Now, in this instance, athletes were breathing high as opposed to breathing low. So they failed their breathing from a biomechanical point of view, and breathing is multidimensional. But what would that mean with these athletes? Now, by the way, these athletes were well trained. They were across all ages, all sports, and from recreational athletes right up to professional competitive. And it did not matter, because the degree of dysfunctional breathing across that group ranged from about 85% to about 91%. So what might that mean? If you have dysfunctional breathing, you're more likely to be breathing hard and fast, and you're pushing your body too hard for the given intensity of physical exercise. And also, your diaphragm breathing muscle, this isn't just for respiration. This muscle here provides stabilization of your spine. Breathing and movement go together. If breathing is dysfunctional, movement is dysfunctional, and if movement is dysfunctional, the athlete is at a greater risk of injury. Poor recovery, because these individuals with dysfunctional breathing, they have an increased stress in the system, and they're spending more time on that increased sympathetic drive and less time in terms of recovery. So it does have a real effect, and it doesn't just have a real effect on the athlete's fitness ability, it has a real effect on their health, because this is something that we do have to bear in mind. Is there a time during physical exercise that people are simply pushing it too hard? And especially if they don't have the breathing on par with that. Now, you can get an idea of how you breathe. This is the body oxygen level test. It's a simple breath hold time, or Bolt score. You take a normal breath in through your nose and out through your nose, and you pinch your nose and you hold your breath. And you time it in seconds. How long can you hold your breath for until you feel the first definite desire to breathe? It's not the maximum length of your breath hold. It's the length of time that you can hold your breath for and still have normal breathing when you resume breathing. This gives you feedback of your sensitivity to the gas carbon dioxide, the gas that I spoke about earlier on. because that is the primary driver to breathe. But it also gives you some feedback on your perception of air hunger. So, for example, if we had somebody who's prone to panic disorder, they can have quite a strong alarm reaction to the feeling of air hunger or suffocation. So it can give us some insight on that as well. It's not perfect, but it gives us a good idea. And a test studied by Kyle Kiesel, a professor of physical therapy, looked at 51 individuals. His conclusion was that if your breath hold time is described there, if it's above 25 seconds, there's an 89% chance that your breathing is functional. 25 seconds. Now that might be an interesting one to measure here in the room and to see where you stand with that. Now, when we're working with elite athletes, we expect them to get up to 40 seconds. But for example, I have seen both scores as low as 3 seconds with people with long COVID. When there's dysregulation of the nervous system, breathing is really, really impacted. And if you have a low breath hold time, you struggle to breathe, you breathe faster, you breathe harder, you breathe upper chest, you feel air hunger. This can be trained. How do you train it? The nose is really where it's at when it comes to breathing. Now, I'm not saying that never breathe through an open mouth. No, we have to be realistic. But where I'm saying is your mouth does nothing for breathing. All you have to do is look inside your mouth. You will see your teeth, your tongue, your hard palate, your soft palate, your gums, saliva. Is there anything inside the mouth that serves any purpose when it comes to breathing? And the answer is no. And if evolution decided that the mouth was for breathing, there would be something inside the mouth to serve that purpose. There's not. Your nose has a minimum of 31 functions. And when you breathe through your nose, you really do influence gas exchange. It's protecting your airways, but also in terms of nasal breathing, the whole relaxation response. Because if we have a habit of mouth breathing, whether it's during rest or exercise or sleep, we are breathing faster in upper chest. And what is our body telling the brain? And if we breathe that way throughout the day and at different times, we are telling the brain that the body is under threat and the brain is launching us into a fight or flight response. Starts with the nose. You can bring that into your way of life, look at the signs and do a little bit of digging in terms of physiology. But breathing light, breathing less air, this is something too you can practice. You soften and slow down your breathing to the point that you feel that you're not getting enough air, to the point that you feel air hunger. Check the saliva in the mouth. Check the temperature of your hands. Check, can you change your physiology by changing your breathing? And it's not about taking the full deep breath. The full deep breath only came into being in the 1880s. Originally in yoga, for about 2,000 or 5,000 years, whenever yoga came into being, that the emphasis there was on breathing less air. The emphasis was breathing light. The emphasis was suspension of the breath. But in Europe in 1880, an idea took hold. Forget about this light breathing. Let's start taking these full deep breaths, because the more air you breathe, the more oxygen that's roaming throughout the body and getting delivered to the tissues, and that is not correct. Nextly, we look at slow breathing. I spoke about this in terms of bringing balance to the autonomic nervous system, and that is the one thing about the breath. Miriam spoke about it. You have at your control a tool to self-regulate. Going into any situation, and even though my emphasis here was physical exercise, this isn't just for physical exercise. The ability, even if I was never to teach anybody, I have been teaching breathing for 23 years. I only came across it by accident. And even if I was never to teach one person, the fact that I've got so much out of it for my own way of life, to self-regulate, to improve concentration, to reduce breathlessness, to have better sleep, to have better intuition, better creativity, and not to be stuck in my head. And these are the tools that we should be taught in school. And those are also the same tools that make it necessary to get a good education. I went through 12 years of formal education, so did you, where we trained how to concentrate, but where we gave the tools to be able to concentrate. Now, breathing deep is not about taking big breaths, by the way. That is simply having good recruitment of this muscle here, the diaphragm. You don't have to breathe deep. You don't have to breathe big to breathe deep. Now, to spice it up a bit, we do some breath holds. So with athletes, we often get them sprinting with breath holds, 40-meter sprints. We push these guys. These are highly trained individuals. We lower their blood oxygen saturation. We increase their carbon dioxide. We put them into a strong psychological perception of air hunger to train their body to make adaptations. And those adaptations carry through to sports performance. Now, you might say it's impossible to breathe through your nose during physical exercise. There's 4 key factors here that will influence your ability. One is your functional breathing. Number 2 is the size of your nasal airway. If you have a very narrow nasal airway, of course, it's going to restrict your breathing and make it that little bit more difficult. So you would have to use a nasal dilator. Number 3 is your fitness levels. Of course, if somebody has a good grounding and fitness, it can help with that transition. But I will say this. A lot of people won't do physical exercise because of the overly sensation of breathlessness. Why not practicing targeted breathing exercises first? To channel and to reduce your perception and sensation of breathlessness, so that then when you do physical exercise, it's manageable and it's more enjoyable. So don't let the sensation of breathlessness put you off doing physical exercise. Train your breathing first, but you have to train it in a specific way. You don't want to increase your sensitivity to carbon dioxide, you want to reduce it. You don't want to be weakening your breathing muscles, you want to strengthen them. And the 4th then is the period of adaptation. But genuinely, you can train your breathing to do your physical exercise with breathing in and out through the nose. Any athlete knows that if you want to strengthen something, you have to add an extra load onto it. And when you breathe through your nose, you add an extra resistance to your breathing. You're forcing your body to do physical exercise with less ventilation. That causes the body to make adaptations. And these adaptations don't just hold true for when you're breathing through your nose during exercise. They carry into when you do mouth breathing during exercise too. We have to be realistic. I'm not saying all exercise should be in and out through the nose. That is not possible. But what I am saying is, for zone 2, for low to moderate intensity physical exercise, the zone which builds up the aerobic base, that is a key zone. So when you do that with your mouth closed, the adaptations that happen in zone 2 will carry in to zone 5. So it's never a time wasted. Now I'm going to come back to these 2 runners here. Which one would you rather be? The one with the mouth open that's struggling to breathe, that's breathing hard and heavy in upper chest, or the one with calmer and more controlled breathing? You don't change your breathing by doing physical exercise. And the reason being is because most physical exercise is done, even at low to moderate intensity, with the mouth open. If you need to train your breathing, you have to start with the nose, but also think about breathing light, breathing slow, and breathing deep. Thank you very much.